Welcome to the December 2023 CIECA webinar, The Increasing Demand of AI and Data in the Collision Industry. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenter is Sumit Chauhan, co-founder and COO of CerebrumX, a Novi, Michigan-based company. CerebrumX is an industry leader in the connected vehicle domain and an AI-powered augmented deep learning platform. Sumit has more than 25 years' experience in automotive Internet of Things, telecom, and healthcare. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenter. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A panel on the webinar screen, and we will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Well, welcome, Sumit. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for everyone who's joined the webinar as well.
Great. Well, Sumit, to get the ball rolling, let's start with some basics to get everyone grounded on today's topic. Connected vehicles and artificial intelligence, or AI, are two hot topics these days, but those words can mean different things to different people. To help us get started, can you provide a little background on what you mean when you talk about connected vehicles and AI?
Of course. And as you rightly mentioned, Paul, AI has been a much abused term of late, and it's been used for all sorts of things. And unfortunately, connected vehicles is not an alien to the same phenomena. I think AI has been used loosely to describe many things that are associated with connected vehicles. But I think the most pertinent part of AI that is responsible for what's going to define the future for connected vehicles, and particularly related to collision and thereof, are issues which are related to ADAS, which are related to electrification of the vehicles, whether it's inside the vehicle or the EV infrastructure that will drive the overall charging infrastructure outside, as well as the ADAS features and route management capabilities that would be there, again, as part of the vehicles or outside. Each one of these will require a large amount of data processing from within the car, which is within the vehicle, which is associated with the driver, which is associated with the vehicle itself in terms of its health, and which will be associated with your surroundings or your environment as to what's happening on the road, what is the state of the traffic, as an example, what's the state of charge of your car, and hence how far are you from the next charging station, and how can we get you there safely without encountering any driver anxiety that's related to that. So in a sense, we are trying to still solve the basic problems that we always envisioned with connected vehicle data and connected vehicles themselves. But what AI is going to do is going to provide you intuitive answers to all those questions by rehearsing and training the algorithms that are being used for traffic management, for how the charging that is left in the car is going to be used for essential functionalities, versus something as mundane as listening to music or your ambient lighting inside the car. So how can I save my charge by not utilizing it for those mundane kind of functions, and utilizing them for more advanced function or mission critical functions. And then ADAS in general, as you can imagine, a small error in an ADAS algorithm can lead to a large amount of chaos on the roads and collisions on the road. So AI in general is going to be a set of algorithms that reside inside the car and outside on the infrastructure. And hopefully they will be interacting with each other elegantly through the V2X mechanism. And they're going to basically answer the questions that we have on how to deal with some of the things that I described in a more elegant manner rather than some hard-coded answers or human intervention. That's how I would put AI and connected vehicles.
Great, thank you. Well, let's start then with how do you access data from a connected vehicle? And then how do you harness that data to proactively prevent collisions and enhance recovery efforts?
Sure. So I think I will categorize the data that is being first. I'll describe what we collect or what we call as connected vehicle data. I think connected vehicle data can be categorized into three parts. One is what's happening inside the vehicle itself or inside the cabin, which is everything that is associated with what's happening with the driver and the passengers. What is their state of affairs in terms of how attentive are they, how many of them are there, how many of them are wearing the seat belts, how many of them are not wearing seat belts, whether they're both mental state in terms of their concentration levels, particularly for the driver, and their general health in the future, will be of great, I would say, importance as data, because we want to know that, in case of a collision or otherwise, the people inside the car, whether it be the driver or the passengers, are in good spirits and health. So that's one part of it. And of course, it was also to do with how the driver is driving the car, whether, if you're in the phase where it's not full ADAS mode at level 5 or 6, you're let's say at level 3 or 4, where it's human intervention is required in terms of ADAS, then you need to be cognizant of what the driver is doing in terms of harsh braking, cornering, so on and so forth. The second bucket is the vehicle health itself. What's going on with the vehicle? What are the normal parameters for the fuel levels, the fluid levels, the battery levels? And I'm just giving examples here, but there are close to 300 parameters that you can collect about the health of the vehicle itself. So that's going to be very important, obviously. Because it tells you if something is going to break down with the car or the vehicle that you're driving, and how you can either prevent it or you can take proactive actions in terms of prolonging, the running cycle of the current trip so that you can reach the next service station. Or in the worst case, it will at least provide insights to somebody who's coming to help you as a roadside help. So, that is very important as well. And the third bucket is, again, your surroundings. A little bit of information related to road health in terms of the status of the roads themselves, in terms of the weather, because that has a significant influence on the vehicles themselves, their driving behavior, particularly when we move into an environment which is ADAS and EV environment. Environmental factors will determine, a lot of things that are related to the health of the vehicle itself, and in turn, the chances of collision. I think it's very important to get all these three parameters in real time and accurately. And even more important, now coming to collision, when an actual collision or a recovery effort is in place, whether pre-collision or post-collision in terms of doing an analysis, what is going to be really important is how do we stitch this information together? It is not just okay to get this information in isolation, but somebody is going to have to stitch this in real time to figure out if any action is required to be taken in real time, or it's something that might be required to do an analysis later once a collision happened. Just as an example, if a collision happens, you will need to figure out what were the road conditions, whether the health of the tires were okay, when the collision happened, whether the driver was a little droopy in terms of not being attentive while he or she was driving the vehicle itself. So all these things cannot be judged in isolation, particularly in an ADAS environment, and they'll need to be stitched together to make sense of who actually is accountable for the crash that happened, whether it was the person who was driving, or whether it was a third party, or whether it was something to do with the infrastructure itself, like the roads or the weather or something like that, which was an extraneous environment. So these are the data elements that we collect and that we analyze in real time or quasi real time basis to figure out what's the extent and severity of a collision or the root cause analysis post facto.
Great, thank you. Well, obviously, this is kind of timely right now because of, obviously Tesla just had a major recall because of their autonomous vehicle features. So what steps are we taking as an industry, or is you taking as a company, to ensure that the collected data is accurate and it's reliable?
Mhm.
And then how do you prevent false alarms or incorrect conclusions regarding collisions?
Right. So in terms of, I would have to say in terms of the accuracy of the data itself, I think a large part of that responsibility will always have to lie with the OEMs themselves, because we get the data from the OEMs. We cannot really, in our current capacity of being operating on the cloud side, unfortunately, we will not be able to influence directly the quality of the data itself that is being collected by the OEMs. Having said that, in our collaboration with BlackBerry, we have a platform called BlackBerry Ivy, which can be integrated on the embedded side, and we can place a client inside the car, which will help in terms of not just the accuracy of the parameters themselves, but also in terms of reducing the latency of the parameters and the all the data that is being collected from inside the car, and doing a large part of that processing on the embedded side or at the edge. Having said that, to answer your question, I think the real answer, whoever is solving that problem, whether it is the OEMs or somebody like BlackBerry or us, I think the essential part is to go to the absolute granular level in terms of the data collection. And what I mean is, I'll give one example, and we can literally take millions of those. When it comes to an EV environment, you would probably be surprised to know that a normal EV vehicle today probably has 11 sets of batteries. Each of those battery cells, collects close to about 100 parameters per second. So it means that 1100 parameters are being collected for one EV vehicle just on the battery side. So the to be accurate, to do anything or do any kind of analysis towards what is going wrong with the vehicle, you will have to go down to that granularity. If somebody is not collecting, those granular level parameters, it's just going to be impossible to do anything with it. So that's I would say that's number one. Number two, which is what we are unfortunately what we are seeing and facing, and we are working with the OEMs to solve that issue, is the frequency of data collection. And it's a business issue as much as it's a technical issue, because collecting data at a high frequency obviously involves cost because of the compute that is involved, and also because of the bandwidth that is required to push that data out to the cloud. But what we are seeing out in the market, whether it is with insurance providers or whether it is with uh, fleet providers or smart mobility companies that require connected vehicle data, the requirement is essentially going towards 3 hertz, which means every parameter that we are collecting today is being collected 3 times in a second. Most of the OEMs today are at 1 hertz or lower in terms of the frequency of collection of data. Now that induces, in a real time environment, particularly during collision, or where there are chances of collision, that can lead to circumstances where a lot of data is missed in those sampling cycles, because in a collision environment, things can happen within a second. So just sampling at a second is not good enough. I think we'll have to improve on that, and we are working with the OEMs. Again, as I said, it's as much a business decision and an issue as much as it's a technical issue, but we have to solve it. That's my larger point, and we have to figure out a way on how we are going to do it, and both from a business point of view, so on and so forth. The last thing I would say is there is still a lot to be done in terms of the AI algorithms that are being used to analyze this data. We are still in the infancy stage, I would say, of the training sets that are available for training the data sets that are required for analyzing any of these events, or I would say a sequence of events, particularly in a collision scenario, some of which I mentioned earlier, of when we are trying to stitch data that is related to what was happening inside the vehicle, pertaining to the driver, what was happening with the vehicle itself, and what was happening outside. Now, I can write a very elegant algorithm, which we are doing as part of our endeavor to help the industry. But those algorithms are always going to be good enough only in terms of the training sets that are available to them to be able to be trained over a period of time. And this is true for any AI ML based platform and algorithm that is there. So the larger point I'm trying to make is we are still in the infancy stage of some of those cycles of training. What particularly makes it a little more complicated is those training sets sometimes have to be very specific to geographies because the data sets themselves are different. When we talk about, let's say, the North America versus APAC, uh, just a random example, the number of bicycles that you will see on the road in China is nowhere close to the number of bicycles you will see, if at all, on the roads in North America. And hence, in a real world scenario, how you train those algorithms, to respond to those sorts of objects on the road and how they appear in your camera or your LiDAR are very different. And how you analyze them in terms of a collision scenario, pre or post, is very different. So the training sets will need to evolve over a period of time. But these are some of the, I would say, the more pertinent and pressing, you can say, concerns or issues that we are facing. And we are very humbly, we are making our way through these. And obviously, as I said, the real responsibility of this would lie with the OEMs, and we are working very closely with them.
Let's talk about that a little more then, if you would. So, what role do the OEMs play in facilitating the data, and how does assuming you have a collaboration with them to access that data, how does that benefit the end user of the vehicle?
Perfect. I think that's a great segue from what I just mentioned. I think right at the onset, the OEMs are the actual, I would say, custodians of the data at the first level, because they are the ones who are directly interacting with the owners of those vehicles, whether it be individual owners or whether it be fleet. So I think, just going step by step, the first responsibility of the OEMs is to at least have an elegant, embedded, as well as a cloud connected vehicle data solution. Unfortunately, I would say not all OEMs are at par, or even, I would say, ready to handle the amount of connected vehicle data that is coming out of the connected vehicles today. And of course, as I said, we are doing our humble bit to help them get there in many cases. But at least the top 5 or 6 OEMs in North America, which includes GM, Ford, Stellantis, Nissan, Toyota, and so on and so forth, at least they do have a very robust infrastructure in terms of the data collection. So that's step one. You need to invest into that as part of your OEM infrastructure and your business. That's step one. Step two is from a legal point of view. I think still, again, I would say we are in that infancy stage. When you buy a vehicle, you will see that the contracts that you sign, if you're buying a connected vehicle, the contracts that you sign from different OEMs look very different. If you buy one from GM versus if you buy one from Toyota, would look very different in terms of what you're signing off to. And I would say that's you can treat it two ways. One is you can treat it as a threat to the data itself that is being collected from the end user, which is a genuine concern, I would say. But more than that, I think many of the OEMs do not even give the end users the option for their data to be collected over a large period of time, when they need it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you approach Geico tomorrow, and you either call them or go online. They'll offer you two plans. They'll offer you a plan which is related to just your normal insurance, or they will offer you a UBI plan, which is a usage-based insurance in the very near future, and we'll be part of that. Um, uh, you know, Not with Geico, but in general with with insurance companies. I mean, um, we would basically provide a mechanism where you can actually use your historical data of the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to provide enough data to the insurance companies to provide you incentives if you are really a good driver. And you should get that incentive from day one. Now, to be able to do that, the OEMs have to collect this data, as part of the last 30, 60, 90 days and keep it, and also keep analyzing it so that they can come up with a driver score. Now, not all OEMs, if at all anyone, is doing that today. And that is a little bit of I would say, a downer from the end user perspective, because they don't have the option to negotiate a better um, incentivized premium for their insurance when they're going to a new company the first time. So that's point number two. From a legal and statutory point of view, you will need to figure out better policies to educate the end users to be able to collect that data. That's point number two. Point number three is what I already mentioned. The frequency of collection of data needs to improve. We are hardly at 1 Hertz, which is clearly not enough, particularly for insurance and collision related environments. We need to do better on those aspects. The fourth aspect is what I briefly mentioned of what many companies, including ourselves, are trying to solve with one of our investing partners, which is BlackBerry, is because of the humongous volume of data that is going to be collected over a period of time. You will require algorithms and compute capability inside the car rather than on the cloud side, because you will not be able to push all of that data out to the cloud because of the reasons of compute and bandwidth, even with 5G and the latency issues involved. You will have to do a large part of that computation inside the vehicle itself. For doing that, the current systems, whether it be QNX based, whether it be Linux based, or whether it be Android based, will not be able to cater to that kind of compute requirement. You'll require very specialized algorithms to be embedded inside the car, and what we call as synthetic sensors to be programmed into the car, which is a software concept. Those need to be looked at very, very significantly and urgently, by the OEMs to figure out how they're going to embed that into the vehicles itself. So that's point number four. I would say the last point from my point of view is more of a regulatory issue. We have all heard of the concerns around data privacy and consent and so on and so forth, particularly related to GDPR. I would have to say that I think we are being a little bit of penny wise, pound foolish in terms of the business cost of things, as well as the real advantage to the users when they actually can consciously and with their consent provide this data to whoever can provide them better services or a better deal in terms of what they want to do. Let me give you one example that we are working on with one of our partners. If you have an EV vehicle and you get home at 6 p.m., you plug in your car right away, right? Whether it is winters or summers. What happens is your vehicle will start charging immediately at 6 p.m. Unfortunately for you, 6 p.m. is probably the highest tariff rate, for the electricity that you're consuming at home, which means that for the same amount of charge, even if you're plugged in till 6 a.m. in the morning, you're actually being charged at the highest tariff rate because your vehicle will get charged in probably 1.5 to 2 hours. What would be more elegant is if you had the option to plug in your car whenever you came home, and if you knew your car is going to be plugged in till 6 a.m., for the charging to happen actually at a time when the tariff is at its lowest, let's say 3 a.m. Now, that is doable. In fact, we are solving that problem with one of our partners. But the point I was trying to make is to be able to do that, you will have to share data for two things. One is data related to your car as to how much of charge is remaining on your car so that the algorithm can figure out how and when it needs to charge for what period of time. And the second is some data related to who's the service provider to you, in your municipality, so that we can figure out which grid you're connected to and what is the charging rate that is being applied to your homes. So if you have that information and you're consciously sharing that, I guarantee you would be saving, hopefully thousands of dollars, over the years. But if you don't know about it, if you don't know how to share that data, if the access to this data is going to be made very difficult because of regulatory purposes, um, in some countries, I'm not talking about North America per se, but this is definitely an issue with some of the European countries, where it's just too difficult, for any business to educate the users and provide those benefits back to them. And I think we'll have to do better on that. Sorry for a long-winded answer, but I just wanted to be comprehensive, on all aspects of the question.
If I could ask you a follow-up question to that. So you're working with obviously lots of different OEMs. Is there any standardization as to what data you get from vehicles? Or in other words, if I'm working with a Toyota and a Ford and a General Motors, are you going to get the same data from each of them, or do you have to customize your algorithms to the vehicle?
So the short answer to that is no, unfortunately. There is no standardization as of today to what is the minimum, or the maximum set of parameters that need to be collected for a particular kind of vehicle, whether it be an EV vehicle or an ICE vehicle. Unfortunately, that's the true answer. Even the nomenclature, the frequency of those parameters being collected is very different, which makes it extremely difficult, to devise algorithms and provide, as I mentioned, the services that we do to the verticals like insurance or, roadside assistance or fleet management companies because of no standardization being there. But that's also, I would say, the opportunity for a company like CerebrumX, which we founded and I'm working for, because then you can sit in the middle and basically try and clean out that data and try and figure out a way to make it easier and more elegant for these verticals to get access to this data in a more homogeneous manner so that you don't have to deal with individual integrations to be done with all the OEMs. And I'm sure the audience here understands how difficult it is for an insurance company to go and integrate with a GM, a Ford, a Stellantis, Toyota, a Nissan, even with one, let alone with all the different OEMs that are there. So Paul, as you rightly asked, it is a problem, and we have been able to come up with our own nomenclature for all the parameters. We have been able to homogenize the frequency of collection as much as we can, irrespective of what the sampling rate is. And we have been able to abstract, you know, to a level like, as an example, we collect 300 parameters per second, from most vehicles. But an insurance company probably only needs 15 or 16 of those, and some of them are a combination of the others. So we've been able to abstract it at a vertical level, and I'm sure there are other companies who are trying to do the same. But the point I'm trying to make is we will get to a point where there will be some sort of, hopefully, homogenization of these parameters, which will help the algorithms to flourish in a more coherent manner. But as of today, it's somebody in the middle who has to do all this work, or it would be the insurance companies themselves, who will have to do this, which is, unfortunately, they would not have the bandwidth to deal with that complexity as of today.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Mhm.
Let me turn the question a little bit then. So a lot of us are familiar with the dongles or the OBD devices that are available today and the data you get from that. Do those include ABS and ADAS and those kinds of sensors? And how do those, with the metrics that you can extract from that, what is the impact for the collision industry?
Sure. So that's a great question because we do see a plethora of devices, which are those what we call adjunct devices, which use the OBD port. Uh, just on a very technical level, the OBD port is actually a debug port. That was originally designed to be a debug port because when you go into your service station, let's say for your maintenance cycle, or if there is a trouble with your car, the OBD port is actually required because you can plug in a device there and you can get the data from the car related to the engine and so on and so forth. But the catch there is that that port was originally meant for the OEMs. They are the only ones who have access to all the triggers and signals that are coming out of the OBD port. What people have done over a period of time, which is almost a hack, is that they have devised these OBD dongles, which can access a subset of the signals that are available from the OBD port. Now, these are helpful in a limited capacity because obviously you are getting information, let's say, related to your speed. You can get things like harsh braking, uh, even collision detection, so on and so forth. But still, some of the very, I would say, basic and rudimentary parameters related to the engine health or even driving behavior are not available. Things like the odometer, is not available with most OBD dongles. There are errors which occur with the OBD dongles because obviously it's a hardware device. It's based on pins that have to fit perfectly, and those are not designed by the OEMs themselves. So these are third parties who are designing these OBD dongles, and many a times, unfortunately, we've also seen the OBD dongles interfere with some of the functionality of the car and actually stop some of the data that is supposed to be sent to the cloud directly for maintenance purposes when a dongle is plugged in. But those are, I would say, those are some of the hardware related issues that are there. But even if we abstract ourselves from the hardware complexity, even if we look at the operational aspects of the dongle, it's still a hardware device. And most people who actually use the dongle are the fleet companies because they want to utilize these devices to track their drivers, to set up a geofence, to track their fleet, so on and so forth. The problem with that is if somebody has something nefarious in mind, they can unplug the dongle, and your vehicle would essentially become unconnected from a connected vehicle, which is a huge risk. We've seen this happen when people have taken off with the vehicles or the payload in some of the fleet scenarios, and that's a big risk. The second risk is that the dongle itself has a lifetime. It's a hardware device. It does have a lifetime of close to 1.5 to 2 years. So the entire cost of the dongle needs to be amortized over 2 years, and it would probably cost you about $100 anywhere between $70 to $100 for a dongle. That's a pretty significant cost, for an OEM to bear. And on top of that, you have the connectivity cost because you'll have to, purchase the connectivity from a Verizon or an AT&T or a T-Mobile if you're in the States. So the overall cost is about close to $150 amortized over 2 years. That's pretty significant for any fleet company to bear. The third aspect of it is that even with all of that, the veracity of the data that is coming through from the dongle is very nascent at best because there are hardly any algorithms that are embedded in the dongle. They will just provide you just the raw data, and then you'll have to build your algorithms on top of it, which is a huge effort, for any fleet company, and so on and so forth. So, anyways, the larger answer is that connected vehicle data, which comes directly from the OEM's cloud, is always much better. You don't require any adjunct device. Nobody can unplug it. It is a direct stream and the gold standard in terms of the veracity of the data itself that is coming from the car, whether it be related to the drivers or it be related to the vehicle itself. So I think it's always a better choice to go with connected vehicle data rather than a dongle in my personal view. But I think I will have to submit that in the twilight phase, when we are transitioning from unconnected vehicles to connected vehicles, which is the present scenario, not all vehicles are connected because we are still, connectivity basically came into its own since I would say 2015-16, and we still have a lot of vehicles since then and before which were unconnected. So you still require probably a combination of dongles and connected vehicle data access to provide the entire algorithm for a fleet or even a traffic management solution or a parking solution or what have you. So there is going to be this twilight zone for another, I would say, 3 to 4 years when all the vehicles, at least in the States, would transition into a full connected mode. Until then, dongles will have a place, but in my personal view, they'll have limited use because of the limitations that I mentioned.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mhm.
AI, autonomous vehicles are growing slowly in fits and spurts. There's good days and bad days, it seems, for autonomous vehicles. What role does AI have in the development of the self-driving car, and how will that impact the liability in the event of a collision?
Yeah, so the first things first, I think AI will have a phenomenal role in terms of whatever shape and form eventually ADAS vehicles take, and we are seeing a lot of that, as we go through those transitions. And the callback that you mentioned that happened with Tesla is testimony to the fact that we will make mistakes and we will have to correct them almost in real time. And you will see some of this happening because the cycle of production and testing and release of these vehicles out on the road is happening at a phenomenal pace, and it's being pushed by the municipalities and the governments themselves who put regulations in place. Like in India, there is absolutely a regulation in place for having all of the commercial vehicles be converted to EV in a fixed fixed time, as well as for ADAS to come into its own over a period of time. So I think AI is going to be central to the transition of vehicles to a full ADAS mode, and also I would put EV transition in the same bucket because I think they'll kind of go hand in hand. Even though they're unrelated, but you will see those cycles going hand in hand because it's it's related to the environment as well. But I think to your other question in terms of the liabilities, that's the most interesting bit. And here is my theory on that. I think the first thing that I feel, and this is just a theory as of today, and we've not seen any evidence of it being what think it would be or otherwise, is that the the collisions or the accidents that happen on the road in the future, or are unfortunately going to happen in the future, are going to be lesser in number, but they're going to be more intense in terms of their impact. And the reason for that is that hopefully, when we take out human error, from driving, which ADAS is exactly about, at the end of the day, why do we need ADAS? We need ADAS because there is human error involved, whether it's related to conscious or subconscious behavior of the driver. That's what we are trying to eliminate by having, essentially a computer drive the car or an algorithm drive the car. Hopefully, we will do a good enough job that at its best, the algorithms would figure better in terms of how the vehicle should be driven, and the number of mistakes that happen on the road are going to be lesser. But along with that comes the fact that if a mistake happens, the chances of that accumulating and becoming multifold, or propagating right through the chain, so to speak, is much higher as well. Because if there is a issue with an algorithm, whether it is inside the car or whether it is outside in a V2X environment related to the infrastructure, the signaling, or what have you, the chances of that collision being much bigger in an ADAS environment are much higher, because a lot more vehicle would get affected by such an anomaly, and the severity of those collisions will be very high as well, because you would be driving probably at speeds which are higher than what we have today. Now, that brings us to the point of what you asked about liabilities, right? Essentially, nobody is driving the car is driving itself. So, who does the liability really lie with? I would have to say that although this is a question which is a very, I would say, heated debate right now in terms of how do we handle the liabilities and the cost of collisions associated with those liabilities in the future from an insurance point of view. But we are already seeing some instances of what it is going to be. Just to give you an example, without naming any of the OEMs, a lot of the OEMs are now in courts facing issues which is related to self-parking feature. Self-parking feature is a subset of ADAS, where you can park the car, by itself. Because of the wrong algorithms and I guess real life scenarios on the road, many of those cars actually banged into other cars which were already parked, and then you got into a liability issue because the customer is not going to pay for that. It's the OEM who had devised the algorithm for self parking, which are in courts and will have to pay, for whatever damages that were caused. It's going to be the same thing when we get into a full ADAS environment, but it's not going to be that simple. And without getting too technical or too deep into it, I'll just throw a few scenarios. What if the algorithm of the car was perfect, but what the algorithm requires as input is not all right? As in, the road signs were not accurately displayed for whatever reasons, whether it be weather or whether it be the maintenance by the municipalities, or the red light, the traffic lights, so on and so forth, were not clearly visible again for whatever reason. The condition of the roads, was not maintained to a level in terms of, let's say, the lane markings, so on and so forth. Again, it's a municipality issue or a maintenance issue rather than the OEMs. Even if we take all of that let's say everybody is doing a good job, let's say the car was not washed properly and some of the sensors on the car were not working because there was, mud on top of it. There was some muck that collected on one of the lidars, which, led to some sort of an issue with its functioning. I'm not trying to put onus on who would be responsible for all those, but I'm just throwing up real life scenarios of how people will have to work through it. And eventually, we will have to come up with a set of rules which everyone will have to abide by, whether it be the OEMs who are producing these cars and those software and those algorithms, or the municipalities who are maintaining all this infrastructure, or it is the car owners who will have some responsibility towards the upkeep of the car itself or the vehicle itself, so that it can be driven safely. But the insurance companies will have to figure out how do they eventually want to assess these risks in a collision scenario. There are already studies on. We are involved in a few of them, where everybody is trying to figure out how do we allocate those responsibilities and at least define those set of rules as to how we will figure out the liabilities that they should lie in a true ADAS environment.
Thank you. So, we've obviously talked about the OEMs and their impact. So let's talk about insurance companies. How do you see the role of the insurance company evolving as these AI and connected vehicles become more prevalent? And is it realistic to think that we'll see this reflected in insurance policies and premiums?
Oh, it's already happening, Paul. For good or bad, it's already happening. As I mentioned, when you go to an insurance company today, you're being offered, I would say, a choice of insurances that you can take. Again, without going too deep into it, what used to happen is, when you called up your insurance company, whichever it was, the first time, they would ask you some, again, mundane questions related to which vehicle you're driving, the VIN number, or the registration number, your driving license number, your age, even things like, are you married, or what is your educational qualification? Why do they do that? Because in the background, they are making a request to the DMV and trying to fetch information related to your vehicle and your driving license on one hand, and then everything that is being fed to them is going through an algorithm, because they feel that somebody who's educated and or is married is probably a more reliable driver than somebody who's not educated or single, which is a little silly, according to me, when you're trying to assess somebody's risk or liability in terms of trying to insure them. A more elegant way is to actually analyze their historical data, as I mentioned, last 30, 60, 90 days of their actual driving behavior, which would tell you, how good or a bad driver they are. But those facilities were not available, or access to that data was not available earlier. And I think along with us, a few other companies are trying to solve that problem so that insurance companies have access to the historical data. So that's one key change that you will see with insurance companies. A lot of decisions would actually be based on real data, real driving data. The second change, which I feel you will see, is a lot of real-time educational, I would say, support that will be available to drivers if you need it. Like if you're a fleet company and you have 100 drivers who are driving for you all day around, you do want to get them to be better drivers because they are a risk to your fleet itself and the cost of maintenance and so on and so forth. So what we are working on, as an example, is we are working with an insurance company where after every trip or at the end of the day, the driver can be sent an educational module, which is actually a video module with real examples of the mistakes that the driver committed while driving, whether it be harsh acceleration, whether it be things related to cornering, so on and so forth. And we can do that real time, as I said, right at the end of the trip or end of the day. And it will be supported by real examples. So it's not just an educational module which is generic. It's something which is very, very specific to that driver. And hence, hopefully, it will make them better drivers and they will get better incentivized as a driver. And for the fleet companies, they stand to gain more because their insurance premiums will go down. Now, the obvious question you would ask is, why would an insurance company do this? Because the the underwriting that they do as a risk on their end for the same vehicle also goes down. So their profit margins increase, the premiums actually go down, and actual accidents that are happening on the road and the wear and tear of the vehicles actually go down as well. So you will see a lot of that happening from the insurance companies themselves. And in general, you will start seeing a lot of insurance companies analyzing collision data in a much more comprehensive manner rather than what is just being reported by two drivers who happen to collide with themselves, right? It's not going to be based on just the visual evidence of what you see when two vehicles collide or the word of mouth of those two drivers who were driving the car, but it will be based on a more comprehensive analysis, as much as to a level of 200 hertz data collection, which we are working on with some of the OEMs pre-collision, because you can predict a collision that's about to happen because of all the ADAS features that are going to be there, related to collision warning and so on and so forth. So you can start collecting data at a much higher frequency if you know a collision is going to occur. And in fact, you can even predict a collision that is going to occur. So you will see the insurance companies relying on a lot more richer and enhanced data set to make some of those decisions as to who is actually liable, even in a non-ADAS environment, in terms of the insurance premiums and who pays for it.
Great, thank you. So my last question is, I think, a very important topic when it comes to this, and it's data privacy. Obviously, it's a big concern for everybody. What cybersecurity measures do you take to maintain user privacy and security while you're sharing data? And how do you anticipate addressing the ethical and legal challenges that are related to collision responsibility?
Sure. So I think the first and the obvious, or I would say the threshold for any data solution which is related to connected vehicles is to have an end-to-end consent mechanism. Because without the consent of the end user, no data, and I repeat it, absolutely no data can and should be used for any purposes or by any means by anyone, including the OEM or us or anyone. So I would say that's the cornerstone for providing a good data privacy and data environment, is to have a great underlying platform which is related to consent management. And we provide that to our OEM partners, and some of the OEM partners have their own consent mechanism. But that's I would say point number one. Point number two is the audits and checks and balances that have to be there to audit the downstream users of this data, because the OEMs are collecting this data on the behalf of the end users. They're providing it to us, and then we are providing it to insurance companies, fleet companies, so on and so forth, with obviously the consent of the end user. But once the consent ends, because every consent is time bound, it is not unlimited. And also, the consent is for a specific use case. Either it is for insurance, or either it is for predictive maintenance or something like that. So the point I'm making is the consent and its validity needs to be tracked, monitored, audited at regular intervals. And whoever is involved in that chain, including the OEMs, us as the intermediary, needs to ensure when the consent is revoked or expires, everybody downstream is following the mandates as are mandated by GDPR to eliminate any data that is related to to the consent that was given. So I would say that's point number two. Point number three is there are specific scenarios. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a loyalty program ongoing with Walmart. We work on certain e-commerce related use cases where your car, if it is near a Walmart, a particular Walmart, and you are a member or a loyalty program a member, for Walmart, you will be thrown a very specific offer because you're in the proximity of that Walmart. Now, what obviously that requires is a consent from you to know that you are in the vicinity of, what's your GPS location and, where you are in terms of, your location to Walmart. And I'm using Walmart as an example. It can be Louis Vuitton, it could be Starbucks or what have you. But to be able to do that, you require consent from the end user, and you need to match it with, let's say, your loyalty program with Walmart. Now, Walmart should not be able to know what car you're driving. At the same time, the OEM should not be able to know what loyalty programs do you encounter, because they don't have any use for it, and they should not. They should not have that information. What that requires is a double blinded bridge in between, where information is shared in a way that the critical parts of those information, like the VIN number of your vehicle or the registration number of your vehicle, is masked for somebody who doesn't need it. And on the other side, your loyalty program number is masked from the person on the other side who's dealing with the vehicle, and they don't need to know it. So those technology elements, and I would say those operational elements, have to be double blinded on both sides for them to operate, and that's what we do as part of our technology on a day in and day out basis. There are specific use cases where you require that double blinded kind of bridge to be there in between, and us and our partners together, know how to do it. But yes, I think there is strict monitoring that is required, on the ethical and legal challenges that exist. With data, we have seen, unfortunately, some companies who have hacked their way, through data by taking the logins, for the companion apps from some of the owners, and then utilizing it to get all the data from the car. That is highly unethical, and it's strictly not legal. It's at the least, it's definitely gray, and somebody needs to be held accountable for those things. I think the standards agencies are going to catch up. GDPR is a good framework, to have around it. But again, we need to keep at it. We need to keep building on top of it, make it more robust. But at the same time, do not lose the viability of collection of data. Don't miss the forest for the trees, as they say. You have to keep your eyes on the larger picture, and you have to know that data is valuable only when it is being used. It's completely silly to have all this data and not utilizing it for the benefit of the end users. So we have to be practical about things, but at the same time, of course, we have to be cognizant of the rights of the end user and do it responsibly.
Great. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, Sumit.
Mhm.
So Stacy Phillips is our marketing director, and she's been monitoring the questions. Stacy, do we have any questions for Sumit?
Yeah, we have a question from one of our attendees. How do you see large language models impacting and being used within the industry, specifically on the repair side?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think on the repair side, so first of all, large language models are being used almost for all aspects of connected vehicles, as they are being used for almost all aspects of technology, in any vertical. But for the repair side, I think just the verbal or written communication in terms of the end user, because as you know, particularly in geographies like North America, a lot of people take pride in maintaining their own vehicles. They want to do a lot of maintenance themselves. So for them to be in a conversational mode when something goes wrong with their vehicle, to ask simple questions and to describe what they can see, and then get back answers in a step-by-step manner in terms of how they should go about repairing their car or even modifying their car, so on and so forth, will be of great help, to them. On the other hand, when you look at the service industry itself, let's say you take your car to a service station. In those cases, obviously, having a conversational model hopefully is helpful to the repair engineers as well, who are much more learned than a layman. But again, having those transparently being displayed to the end customer hopefully will alleviate any issues that are related to misappropriation of the repairs themselves, because both people will see the same data, they will see the same kind of outputs coming in when you ask a question, and then they can realize what should be the fix, and both people can agree because it's coming out of an algorithm rather than the mouth of the repair engineer itself. And I think it will be more reliable from that point of view.
How do you ensure the accuracy and reliability of the data sets used?
The accuracy and reliability of the data sets, obviously, you need to keep the thresholds in place, which is the lower thresholds and the higher thresholds, which over a period of time, you will be able to define if you're working with those data sets. As I mentioned, for a large period of time, you will be able to define the corner cases or the extraneous cases, so you can eliminate those. And then, as I said, the algorithms themselves, need to be trained with these data sets over a large period of time. For them themselves to figure out what the end cases or the corner cases are. So it's a question of, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, because the algorithms themselves will become elegant enough over a period of time to take out the corner cases or at least point out the corner cases. But yes, in the beginning, the data sets will have to be defined, as I mentioned, I think briefly, very coherently in terms of the geographies that you're operating in, for what set of vehicles you're concerning these data sets with, and what is the overall context in which these data sets are being used to train these algorithms. So it's a complex question. It's a very technical question, but yes, you'll have to define certain boundaries for the data sets that are being used, and a certain set of parameters that they'll have to satisfy for them to be used for training these algorithms.
Great. Well, Sumit, we're out of time here. So I'd just like to point out that, well, first, thank you very much for taking time to do this today. I thought it was a very interesting discussion and appreciate your time. I would like to say this presentation has been recorded and will be available later today at CIECA.com. I would invite you to check CIECA.com for a schedule of future broadcasts and to watch recordings of past webinars. Links are available under the Meetings and Events tab. And please follow CIECA's social media platforms to stay up to date on upcoming events and news. And that concludes our seminar. Thank you very much, Sumit.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stacy.